you for being with us, but just let us wait one more minute before we get started. Okay, I think we can get started. There's just a few of us here, which hopefully means that we can actually have a more engaged conversation while we're together for the next 45 minutes or so. This session is all about the examination process, master's, PhD. And I'm going to take you through that process and talk to you about some of the concerns that people often have. And a lot of it, I think, can feel like a sort of a mystery black box. And you hand over your thesis to the examination gods and you don't know what happens next. And certainly I can remember in my own PhD many years ago that the examination process was one of the most unsettling times for me. Suddenly, I didn't have anything I needed to be working on. So I had that weird feeling I should be working on my PhD. And then, oh no, I've submitted it. And then, what is anyone, is someone reading it right this minute? What did they think of it? What if I've made a huge mistake? I remember having nightmares that I was caught for plagiarism. So it was a very tumultuous time for myself. And I hope that that you who are here with me today don't also experience that kind of ridiculous anxiety that I experienced. And I'm a big believer that one of the best things we can do to try and mediate anxiety is to get information. Often, what is most scary is when we don't really know what's happening. And so I want to use this session to try and share as much as possible what actually happens during the examination process. But I'd like to make it useful for all of you. So I'm going to give you a few minutes and just think, what questions do you have, and put them in the chat bar. As many as you can. What is it you're worried about with the examination process? What would you like to know? What seems mysterious and no one's really explained? As many questions and comments as possible into the chat bar would be really useful. So I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes while you put that into the chat bar, and I will do my best to engage with whatever you raise there. If you've just joined us, please pop your questions into the chat bar. Anything to do with the examination process, questions, comments, concerns. I'm getting some really nice questions. I'm just giving you a thumbs up to let you know that I've read them. I will engage with all of them. If you have a question that you would rather not post under your name, if you go to the chat bar where it says to everyone, you can click the down arrow and just find my name, Sue McKenna. Oh, I guess, am I there? Yes, find my name, Sue McKenna, and click on that. So it comes straight to me. And I assure you, I will not tell anyone who it was that asked that question. So if you've got any questions or comments or concerns about the examination process, please pop them in the chat bar so that I can make sure we engage with them all. But if you'd like to make it that only I know who it was that asked them, in the chat bar, click next to everyone and choose my name, Sue McKenna. And then I will get your question, and I promise you I will answer it without revealing your identity. Not that there's anything that you should feel worried about asking. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I remember being very anxious during my examination process. So I can assure you, whatever feelings you are having right now are very valid. Whatever questions you have in your mind, I'm sure others have too. Okay. Lots of nice questions. A lot of the questions are around the time frame, and that's understandable because I'm sure you've all heard horror stories of examinations that take months and months and months and months. And unfortunately, that can happen. And I'll explain why. I'll explain why that happens when I go through the process. I'm just making a note for myself in the chat bar to remind me to tell everyone about it. Okay, and one other thing I'm going to chat. Okay, in the chat bar, you will find that I've shared the Higher Degrees Guide, which you are welcome to download from there, or you can just do a search for the Higher Degrees Guide on the website, on Google, just go for Rhodes University Higher Degrees Guide. The current Higher Degrees Guide we are using is the Higher Degrees Guide 2024. It gets updated every few years. Good, I'll make sure, keep the questions coming. In that Higher Degrees Guide, the whole process is actually spelled out. So chapter 4 of the Higher Degrees Guide that you can see on your screen now tells you all about the examination of a master's thesis. It tells you what the different roles are of the various people and what they should or should not do. How they get how the examiners get appointed, what their recommendations are, and so on. And then if we go ahead, chapter 5 is the same thing for the doctoral thesis. So I'm going to go through basically in my own words what is written here. But bear in mind that this is a good resource to go and have a look at. Also, bear in mind that I'm now speaking as an individual, as someone who has pretty strong views actually about the examination process. And to be honest, I think that universities across South Africa could do a better job in terms of making things clear. I'm very opposed to anything that's kept secret or murky or unclear. I believe that the best and fairest way of having any form of education is to make things explicit. So there are aspects of the examination process that I personally think should be made more explicit, but nonetheless, there is a lot that is already explicit, and you can find that in this Higher Degrees Guide. So I'm going to take you through the process now. I'm just going to talk you through the process. So the first step is that you are getting towards the end of your master's or your doctoral study, and you believe that it's kind of ready to, or getting close to being ready to being submitted. And your supervisor hopefully is explicit about this too. Yes, you're close, or no, you've still got a lot to do. Um, and once you all agree that it's close to being complete, you would go on to Ross and you'd fill in the intention to submit form. Now, this is really important. If you don't fill in that intention to submit form, your supervisor, strictly speaking, can't start finding your examiners, can't start approaching those examiners and finding out if they're available. So it's that intention to submit that you complete on Ross that starts the whole examination process happening. When you fill in that form on Ross, it asks you, when do you expect to submit? Now, don't panic if you don't make that deadline, because oftentimes you think, I'm going to submit in October, and you actually submit at the end of November. So be it. But it should be as close as possible. So obviously you want it to be realistic. Discuss it with your supervisor. I'm thinking, supervisor, that the study is going to be ready by the end of November. Can I fill in the intention to submit? Um, and then you go on and you fill that in. That at that point, your supervisor, and a few of you asked who chooses the examiners, your supervisor will approach potential examiners. They have the power to approach them and to find out if they're available. There are so, many responsibilities that one has when you are an academic, that it's not unusual for examiners to say, no, sorry, I can't examine this Christmas. I'm already doing another thesis or whatever. So often to get two examiners for the master's or three examiners for the doctorate, your supervisor might need to approach 4 or 5 or 6 people to find those that are available. So your supervisor is the one who approaches potential examiners. Now you'll notice here that it says that the supervisor may not disclose the names of the examiners to the candidates. So that's part of what I said, what I find a little bit problematic, but it is a national norm that the student doesn't know who the examiners are. So that's a secret. But they can discuss with the candidates without naming anyone who you think would be a good examiner. And I always do that. I ask my students, okay, you're about to do the intention to submit. Who do you think would be a good examiner? Often my students give me quite good ideas. Someone whose work they've used a lot, someone who they've interacted with, they've met at a conference and they quite like this person's approach. I always ask my students, but I don't tell my students in the end who it is that I approach or who it is that agrees to do it. So the student doesn't know who the examiners are, but I quite like to discuss that with my students, the potential. Supervisors don't have to do that. It does, the higher degrees guide does make it clear that we should try and get people who are sufficiently distant from the student and the study to give an objective evaluation of the study. So we would be unlikely to use someone who is, someone who you've already doing some other research project with or you've co-authored with. And if we do choose someone who already has some kind of relationship, that actually has to be declared on our form. The supervisor, when they upload the potential examiners' names, there's a space that you have to declare if you are aware of any direct relationship between the student and that examiner. So it doesn't mean we can't use someone that maybe you've worked with on some other project or whatever, but we should declare that. And ideally, we would have people who are not involved with you at all. There is not a rule that a master's examiner has to have a doctorate. They have to have a master's, but you can have someone with a master's examining a master's. But typically speaking, that would be a bit unusual. There are sometimes good reasons for it. We have got some absolute experts in a field who never did a doctorate. They might be the expert who understands your particular topic, but they haven't got a doctorate. So we can appoint someone with a master's, even at doctoral level. So even to examine a doctorate, we could have someone without a doctorate. That would be rare. And on the Ross form, your supervisor would need to explain, why are you appointing this person if they don't have a doctorate? And the supervisor would then be able to say, well, actually, they're a world-renowned expert. They've written publications on this, or whatever reason. That this is a person in industry with expertise on the particular methodology or machinery that my student uses. So even though they don't have a doctorate, you know, here's the reason. But typically, your examiners have a doctorate. You have 2 examiners at master's level, 3 examiners at doctoral level. Now, Rhodes University is very good in that we don't use internal examiners. There have been reviews of the doctorates in South Africa that have said that internal examiners, in other words, someone else in your department, but not your supervisor, there's often tensions around petty politics or whatever, or the opposite. It's, your colleagues, your best mate, I'll examine for you, you examine for me, and we won't be too critical. So there are good reasons why internal examiners are not ideal, and we don't use them at Rhodes University. And we certainly don't use the supervisor as an examiner, which does happen in some parts of the world. In fact, it's very common in the US that your supervisor becomes your examiner, which I guess at undergraduate level is the norm. The person who lectures you is the same person who marks your final exams. But at postgraduate level, we generally have the supervisor working with you to create the knowledge, and then the examiner being someone separate. And then that once those examiners have said they'll do it, your supervisor will upload their names onto Ross. And we have to give some basic details. They've got a PhD. Where did they get it from? Why are we selecting them? So there's a little section on Ross that your supervisor will have to explain, why is this the right person to do this examination? We also shouldn't use the same examiner in a 3-year period, because you don't want one department always using the same 2 examiners. And there is some rather problematic practices like that in some other universities that have come to light through various quality assurance processes, where it does seem that you have these little cabals of this group marks this group's students and this group marks this group, and we just constantly marking each other's work. That wouldn't happen here, and one of the ways in which we make sure it doesn't happen is to say that you don't use the same examiner in a 3-year period. So once the supervisor has uploaded your potential examiner's names and details onto Ross, that will go to the HOD to sign off on, and then go to the dean to sign off on. So your supervisor is the one who knows your study the best and who wants the best for you, and who chooses your examiners very, very carefully. But if the HOD or the dean thinks, hang on, you've already used that examiner recently, or that's your brother, or whatever other reason, it is possible, even if a supervisor's selected an examiner, for others to question it and possibly to say, no, 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 choose another examiner. In the case of the doctorate, the examiners have to be appointed by Senate. Now, Senate only meets every so often, but don't worry, what happens is that this is delegated to the Deputy Vice Chancellor to sign off on Ross, but it'll get ratified at the next Senate. I have never heard of a case where it's all signed off and the examination's in progress and then Senate rejects those examiners. But on paper, that is certainly a possibility. I've never heard of that happening, because the supervisors have chosen carefully, the HOD has checked, the dean has checked, and then in case of the doctorate, the DVC has checked before the thesis goes to those people. So once those people are approved, you submit your thesis, and you submit it via Ross. And you submit your thesis with a letter specifying that it is with or without your supervisor's permission. And that document has to be signed. It can be signed electronically, has to be signed by your supervisor to say, yes, I agree, this is ready for examination. Now, that's something really important to know. You, as students, have a right to submit your thesis for examination without the support of your supervisor. It is your right to say, this is ready for examination. I don't know why my supervisor says it's not ready. I don't know why my supervisor is making me rework it for the 20th time. I want it to be examined, and you submit it. I would strongly, strongly advise you not to do that. I can imagine there might be very rare cases where you've got some toxic supervisor who's hell-bent on, I don't know, controlling you. Maybe that happens and you are certain it's ready. But I would say that 99.9% of the time, if your supervisor says it's not ready for examination, they are trying to protect you from the fact that it's not ready for examination and protect you from the consequences of the examiner and looking at a thesis that is not ready. So there you have the right, but I would really urge you to think very, very, very carefully about submitting without your supervisor's approval. I'm going to keep talking, but please do feel free to either pop a question in the chat bar or to put up your hand if you want to interrupt me and ask a question, so that you're not just listening to me, and especially if I'm not clear. Now, you might be thinking, well, I want to submit this. I'm certain my supervisor is a mad person. They're toxic. It's ready. I don't know why they won't let me. I'm submitting it without their support. And then you would do that and you would indicate that on the form. So instead of having your supervisor's signature, you indicate this is without my supervisor's support. The examiners are not told it is without the supervisor's support because we don't want to bias those examiners. So the examiners would get your thesis in the normal way and they would be expected to write the report in the normal way. And only after the entire examination process is finished, when they get a thank you letter from the institution, which they always get told it was with or it was without the supervisor's support. So the examiners are eventually told, but only after the entire process is finished. Then how long? A few of you asked this question. Once it gets submitted to Ross, you upload your document. It then gets sent by the registrar's division. What is the name of the form for the supervisor's support? It's an examination form. Let me quickly share my screen and I'll go onto the forms page to show you where you get the forms. Share. There we go. If we go to here, I never know what the page is called, so I just say Rhodes University. Oh, I'm not typing there, sorry. Rhodes University Forms, let's just call it that. Rhodes University Forms. There we go. Nice, easy address. It's actually ru.ac.za/registrar/forms. And that's where you can find all your forms for whatever. If we go down to, here we go. Hopefully you can see it on the screen, Masters and PhD. Here you have the Higher Degrees Guide, which is that document I was just sharing, which spells out all the nitty-gritty details of what I'm presenting you today. Application, registration, here we go, submitting a thesis, intention to submit a thesis for examination, and they say it should be submitted 2 months before you intend to submit. That's not a hard and fast rule, but obviously because the examiners can only be approached once you've filled it in, don't leave it till the last minute. And that does happen sometimes, and that will greatly delay your examination process. If you don't fill in an intention to submit and you submit your thesis via Ross, it can't be sent to the examiners until you fill in the intention to submit. The examiners are appointed by your supervisor, which can take a lot of time because your supervisor approaches these two guys, and then this one says no and approaches someone else, and they said they're busy, and then they approach someone else and they say yes, but only if it's 6 months, and then no, it's here. This can take a while. Then the supervisor submits those details, as I said to you, then it has to be approved by the HOD, then it has to be approved by the dean. All the while, your thesis is just sitting there in limbo on Ross, waiting to be sent to the examiners. That's why we have the intention to submit. You fill it in and it appoints, it starts the process of getting your examiners lined up. And that can take quite a long time to get them lined up and approved. You don't want that to happen with your thesis when your thesis is already just sitting there. This is now on Ross. So I want to click on this button here, intention to submit, because it might have a form Yeah, thesis intention form. I can see that it's going to try and download it. But actually, nowadays it's all on Ross. So you can go onto Ross and do that. And then once you are ready to submit it, you submit it with a declaration form. So once you're ready, your thesis was ready to upload, your supervisor says, cool, do it, your examiners are appointed, you go onto Ross, you upload your thesis, and then you upload these other two documents as well. The one is this declaration form, which you fill in, which basically says, yes, it is my work. This is the title. I wrote it myself. And then this one, exam entry form and supervisor's statement. And this is again where you write your name, your student number, the title of your thesis. And then this is this one here, that your supervisor has to sign off on or not. And if your supervisor doesn't, that's where you indicate I'm submitting without my supervisor's consent. And so this is the form. And if we click here, you can see it, I hope, on the screen. There we go, your name, your student number, the thesis, what degree is it? Is it a master's in education? Is it a doctorate? What is it? Your thesis title, your contact details. I mean, this day and age, nobody sends anything by post. But anyway, fill it in, your email address. It says not your campus address. Okay, well, I would put them both there probably. And then your signature and then the supervisor's signature. And then the supervisor either crosses off with or without to say that it's with to say I do not support this submission or I do support this submission. It just reminds you, please note that your supervisor's approval does not mean that the examination process will be successful. We want you to succeed when our students do well. We look good as supervisors. That's one of the reasons why I might tell my student, don't submit yet. There's more work that needs to be done, is because I want you to succeed. But it is still a fairly subjective process. And so I, as your supervisor, would never sign this if I don't believe it's good enough. So I always tell my students, if I've signed your form, it means I think this is a good enough master's and a good enough doctorate. I wouldn't sign it if I didn't say yes. But that doesn't mean we're not going to get an examiner who calls for additional work. So that's what happens. It then goes off to your examiners, 2 examiners in the case of the master's, 3 in the case of a doctorate. In both cases, ideally at least one is an international. So that's one of the things Rhodes University prides itself on. Many universities don't do that, but we have a rule, even at master's level, that as much as possible we include international people to make sure that we know that our master's and PhD theses are really getting to be viewed by a broad range of people from a range of different areas. How long does the examiner have? Well, they get given 6 weeks, but that's 6 weeks from when it gets sent to them. If you upload your thesis and they haven't even been appointed yet because you didn't do your intention to submit, it could take a few weeks before it gets sent to them. So then the thesis gets sent to them. And if everything is lined up properly, it should only take a few days after you submitting that the registrar's division will first just check that everything is there as it should be, that you've got your thesis plus those 2 forms, your declaration form and the form that the supervisor has signed. Registrar's division checks that all 3 of those are there, that your thesis opens properly and there isn't technical problems. That'll take just a few days. Our registrar's division are incredibly efficient. And in my experience, it's less than a week absolutely worst case scenario between you uploading the thesis and those other 2 documents and them being sent to the examiners. And then the examiners get 6 weeks. After 5 weeks, they get a reminder to say you've only got 1 week left. Tanusha, no, the supervisors don't know. And that's one of the things we're actually trying to change. We're trying to make it so that the supervisor and the student can go onto Ross and can see that it's been uploaded and that the examiners have received the thesis. At the moment, we can get an email saying, yes, they've been uploaded and they've been received. Or the supervisor might get an email from the registrar's division saying examiner B or examiner C hasn't actually downloaded the document off for us. We've sent them an email telling them to get it, and we can see on the system they haven't downloaded it yet. Please email them. So generally speaking, we don't hear unless there's a problem. But our registrar's division do check that when they send that email to those approved examiners to say thesis is in the system, please download it, they'll check if it's been downloaded. And if it hasn't been downloaded, they'll send a reminder. And if the examiner doesn't get the reminder or doesn't deal with the reminder or has still not downloaded the thesis, the registrar's division will email the supervisor and say, hey, this examiner, we've reminded them, they still haven't downloaded the thesis. And we always tell the email from the registrar's division to those examiners tells them, even if you're only planning to do it in a few weeks' time, please download it and check so that there's no technical problems. So a week before the due date, in other words, after 5 weeks, the registrar's division sends a reminder to say you've got 1 week left. Here's the bad news. A lot of examiners behave extremely badly, and they are told they've got 6 weeks, and they take 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 3 months, 6 months. All I can say to you is please don't be that person when you are examiners. Remember that this is a person waiting at the end of this process. There is a human being, a student who's put their blood, sweat, and tears into this thesis. Don't make them wait. I don't understand how examiners seem to often just, I suppose because it's not, if you didn't hand in your marks, if you were a lecturer and you didn't hand in your marks by the mark deadline for undergraduate, your head of department would have your neck on a block and go like, hey, the marks were due on Friday, what's going on? Because when you're examining, I don't work for the university I'm examining for. And the pay is usually it's an honorarium. So you're not getting a whole lot of money. I don't report to anyone I've agreed to. I suspect that that's part of the problem, but that makes me very sad because speaking purely for myself, when I examine, I always think this is a human being who is waiting to hear from me. So making them wait is really unforgivable. And another problem emerges is that after 3 months have gone by, or 4 months, or 5 months, and the examiner's report's not in, the university has the right, and the supervisor has the right to say, enough, I want to appoint another examiner. But then you know that it's going to take time again to find that examiner, to get them approved by the HOD and the dean and the DVC if it's a doctorate. And then they've got to start the whole 6-week process even after we've approved them. So it's always this very difficult situation where these horrible things happen of thinking maybe we should just keep nagging this examiner and telling them, come on, we're waiting, rather than starting a whole process again. It's not a common thing. Well, I shouldn't say it's not common, but it happens that the examination process takes much longer than it should. It's very hard for Rhodes University to navigate that because they're relying on the goodwill of external people who do not report to us. But if that happens, I'm really sorry, and just rest assured that the university is doing as much as it can to nag this person without wanting to make them angry. So it's a really difficult situation. But let's go on to the better story, which is the norm, which is where you've submitted your thesis on Ross up to a week maximum before it gets sent to the examiners, assuming those examiners were already approved. Those examiners have 6 weeks. Let's hope you've got 3 if you're a doctorate, 2 if you're a master's, normal examiners who are not horrible people and who get their reports in time. The reports then go to, in the case of a master's, I'm just going to scroll down so you can see. The reports then go to the head of the department. So the registrar's division will send them to the head of department, and the head of department can then have a look and say, oh, good, they both agree. The reports are saying more or less the same thing, and we can now send it off to the dean to sign off on. We'll talk back in a moment. I'll tell you a bit more about when that doesn't happen. But generally speaking, the examiners, let's just agree that let's just say for this example, that they have agreed. and that they both have agreed on one of these options. These are slightly different for masters and for doctorate, but not that different. So I'm going to go through them quickly. These are the options available for an examiner. Firstly, in a master's level, they give a mark. In a PhD level, they do not give a mark. So I think that was one of the questions. And we don't get a mark. If you've got a doctorate, you've got a doctorate. That's it. Whether it's a good enough doctorate or a blinking, amazing breakthrough doctorate, doesn't matter. It's a doctorate. And if you have the blinking breakthrough, amazing doctorate, it's your publications that will set you above the average doctorate, not a mark. And a master's, though, you do get a mark. And it is quite important, that mark, in the sense that, for example, the National Research Foundation won't give you funding for a doctorate unless you get over 65% for the master's. So yeah, the mark can matter, but it's not the end of the world. I had a very, very, very mediocre master's and managed to go on and do a doctorate. So this is what's available. The A and B are not much. For firstly, A, accept the thesis with or without the distinction, and no corrections are needed. Now, regardless of whether you get a distinction or not, this is as rare as hen's teeth. The idea, it's perfect, no corrections needed. I wouldn't even aim for that. It doesn't happen. I have seen it happen, but I think I've seen it happen once. So that would be very rare. This one is much more common, and this is first prize. This is open the champagne, brilliant, congratulations, it's all but done. And so B is, yes, there are some errors that need to be done. They're small, typographical, whatever. The third option is that there are some changes. There's some small bits and pieces. That little bit should be strengthened. I think this section should come earlier. But they're minor enough, they should be done, but they're minor enough that either the supervisor or the head of department can check that they're done. That is also first prize. So A doesn't exist. That's hen's teeth. That's unicorn stuff. Forget about that. B or C, I don't really think there's a big difference. B means very, very minor typographical. C means slightly bigger changes, but both of them are just do them, and the supervisor must check that you've done them, or the head of department must check you've done them. Those are first prize, gold star, open the champagne. Now, I want to talk to you about this one. The thesis, the examiners say it doesn't quite meet the standards yet, and there's more work that you need to do, and you need to resubmit it, and it'll be examined again. Now, nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to get that. If you get that, you're going to feel sad, you're going to feel anxious, you're going to feel worried. It's basically the examiner saying, yes, there's a master's thesis here, or yes, there's a PhD thesis here, but it's not quite there yet. They might even want you to go and collect more data, or they might just want you to rework or strengthen the theory or restructure it a bit, but the examiner wants to see it again. I understand that this is not what anyone wants, but I also want to let you know that two of my students over the years, I've had two doctoral students who got a resubmission, which is what we call this by shorthand, a resubmission. And those two went on to fly, to flourish, to build incredibly powerful academic careers. The one went on to actually form Malawi University of Science and Technology. He and two others were appointed by the president of Malawi to form a whole new university. And he became the first registrar of that university. Unfortunately, he died of COVID. But I just want to point that out to you. The other one, the other student I've had out of, I don't know, I've had many, many master's and PhD students over the years, and I've had two that were resubmission. And the other one was someone who has since then gone on to be one of my most published PhD candidates. She's trying to think, she's deputy dean of the university where she works at the moment. Extremely well published, has a very strong research identity, and she got a resubmission. So I hope it doesn't happen to any of you, just because it's a real pain in the ass. But you know what? I need you to understand it is not the end of the world. It happens. According to a colleague of mine, Paul Ashwin at Lancaster University in the UK, he says that about 20% of theirs are resubmissions. So that's 1 in 5. In South Africa, it seems to be much rarer. but it is not unheard of. And some people are saying it is becoming more common. So I just want to really make it very, very clear that if you get that, I'm not saying you won't be disappointed, but please do your best not to allow that imposter syndrome voice to shout too loudly. It happens, it's a pain. You got to figure out how you're going to handle it. But your supervisor's there for you. And between you and your supervisor, you'll get through this. And if you are anything like the two resubmissions students that I've worked with, they've gone on to absolutely flourish. All right, the next option is to have an oral exam or written exam. This is a very, very rare instance, and I actually have never heard of it happening at Rhodes University. But basically, this would be a case where there's a suspicion that your study is not your own, that you've either paid someone to write it for you, or in the case of today's day and age, that you've used a large language model to generate it to the extent that it's not your contribution. It doesn't mean you can't use AI, but it's sort of saying this person doesn't even, that this is not knowledge that is owned by the writer. This is not knowledge that is the contribution of this candidate, this student, this author of the thesis, that the author of the thesis is actually a machine or outsourced. And so that's how that comes in. But I've never heard of that actually being invoked. It might become more common now with with AI, but what you will find is that more and more universities are including an oral exam. So Rhodes University will start to include an oral exam for the doctorate, and we are hoping that that will maybe come in by next year. People who are already in the system, the kind of norm is that we can't apply a rule that wasn't already in the rules when you registered. But I suspect that even those who are in the system who want to have an oral exam at the end of their doctorate, and that's a whole nother topic we can talk about another time. But having an oral exam is actually, believe it or not, a wonderful thing. It really gives you an opportunity to talk about your research and to have this sort of recognition for your work. And to speak back to your examiners where there may have been a misunderstanding. But at the moment, we don't have an oral exam. And so even though it is allowed for in this way, I haven't heard of it happening. But Rhodes University is putting in place the rules to make an oral exam part of the doctorate. And I wouldn't be surprised if we bring it in at the master's level again soon. I just want to talk now quickly about this last one. The doctorate should not be awarded to the candidate. And that is a fail. So I want to make it very clear that a resubmission is not a fail. And I heard someone saying, oh, I failed, I've got to resubmit my thesis. And I want to say, well, then it means you didn't fail. A resubmission means a bit more work is needed. Fail means that it's done and dusted, it's over. Now, I want to make it very clear, a weak thesis is not going to be a fail. A bit of a misinterpretation of some data won't be a fail. A misapplication of some theory won't be a fail. If it's significant enough, the examiner might say, rework it and resubmit it. If it's not that significant, they'll say, hey, this isn't quite right. You need to change this and get your supervisor to check it. Those are not fails. What what you fail for is if you genuinely, fraudulently did not do the work, fabricated data, manipulated data. So it's written there that fail is an option, and indeed it is an option. But I want to make it very clear that nobody writes the perfect thesis. I keep using the term a good enough PhD and a good enough master's. I can assure you my own master's and PhD were good enough. So they did all the things they needed to do, but neither of them were going to change the whole world or even my field. So there's a big difference between an ordinary master's and PhD versus a fail. The thing that leads to a fail is a genuine manipulation of data, fraudulent data. I'm very, very grateful that at Rhodes University we haven't had to. Oh, sorry, I only just read the comment to increase the font. Sorry. I'm very grateful that at Rhodes we haven't had cases where this has happened. But even there, remember you have right to appeal. So I can't imagine this happening to you, But if you did have an examiner who says this is a fail because it's clearly that this is not real data, you've manipulated the data, you've made it up, you've bought this thesis, whatever the accusation is, you do still maintain the right to appeal. If you believe that this terrible accusation is completely false, of course, if this happened, it would be absolutely, awful, but it's not the end of the world. If you didn't do the things you're being accused of doing, you have a right to appeal. So what happens then? That the reports come in. With any luck, you're sitting on a B or a C, and the reports come in, and in the case of a master's, the head of department brings them together. If they agree, it's easy. If the marks are sort of between 5 and 10% difference, you'll just average them. If the marks that they're recommending are more than 10% difference, then it's much more complicated. Then you've got to look at the quality of the comments of the two. If one report says fine, 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 good, 65%, and the other one writes a very detailed explanation of where the strengths were and where the weaknesses were and what it contributes, and gives 82%, then they're unlikely to just go 65 plus 82, add them together and divide by 2. The head of department is more likely to go with the higher mark. So the quality of the report does matter. In the case where there's a complete disagreement, one says a resubmission and one says minor changes, probably you'll get the resubmission. It's up to the head of department, and the head of department will often speak to the dean and the deputy vice chancellor to make a decision. But if one examiner is saying, no, there's quite a lot more needed and I want to re-see it, we will always err on the side of quality. If that examiner, though, is saying it must be reworked, and they're basically calling, as unfortunately some examiners do, for the thesis they would have written, a completely different approach, then the head of department probably goes like, no, sorry, we'll just go with the examiner who makes a more sensible report. In the case of the doctorate, there's 3 examiners, which in a way is easier because you're not just dealing with he said, she said of 2 reports, you've got 3. And typically, if there is one that's an outlier, at least the other 2 would be quite similar. So generally speaking, in the case of the masters, the head of department, who might discuss it with the dean and the deputy vice chancellor, will be able to come to a decision as to what's appropriate. In the case of a doctorate, we have what's known as a committee of assessors. So you've got 3 reports, and those get sent to the committee of assessors. The committee of assessors is made up of senior staff members, and those senior staff members read through all 3 reports, and they have to say, what they believe. I'm going to go down to the options for the doctorate, and what they believe the appropriate responses. And oftentimes that committee of assessors actually just happens electronically, because here's the committee of assessors, the COA, because the examiner is clearly all agreeing. So we just get sent them by email, and we just have to say our agreement, whether we recommend the degree be awarded. Sometimes it'll be degree be awarded with just some typographical. We might say it should be a reward awarded with a few changes that need to be signed off by the supervisor or head of department, or it needs to be resubmitted, or it should not be awarded. Just to reiterate, in all my years of supervising, I think I've supervised 37, 38 PhDs to graduation, about the same number of masters, and I've been on committee of assessors with great many students. I have never come across this one. So, and if it were there, it wouldn't be because you haven't got the strongest thesis. This would be because of fraud. This is a resubmission, and that can happen. And as I say, if one of the examiners is calling for a resubmission, unless that examiner has written a report in a way that suggests that there's a real problem in the way that the examiners has interpreted the thesis, or they've got their own agenda and it's starkly different from the other 2, generally we would agree that it can go for a resubmission, because we want you to get the best possible quality thesis out of it. But if If there's a case where there's a major disagreement between the examiners, then we try to reach consensus. So it is possible to send all the reports to the other examiners and to say, you've called for a resubmission. The other two say this is a brilliant thesis. Might you reconsider your position? That is possible. On the other hand, what we can do is one of these two, A or B. I'll go through C and D in a moment, but A or B is not uncommon. It's already a rare case that you've got a huge disagreement between the examiners. And the COA, the Committee of Assessors, go, you know what, this disagreement isn't a small issue of just rework thesis. There's a incompatibility between these examiners. What are our choices as the Committee of Assessors? And we will then, as the Committee of Assessors, decide whether we think we should go with A or with B. A is where you get a fourth examiner. So you've already got 3 reports and they're problematic because they take such a very different position. And we can't bring them together. As a committee, we've decided they just can't come together. Then we get the fourth examiner. The fourth examiner doesn't even know they're a fourth examiner. They'll not be told that afterwards, but they get invited in the usual manner. They get the usual 6 weeks to do so you can see why we don't rush to do this, because you can imagine how much time this adds. And the alternative is an external assessor. Now, an external assessor is slightly different to a fourth examiner. They get the thesis, but they also get the 3 reports. So they are not only commenting on the quality of the thesis, so they need to have expertise in the area, but they also looking at these 3 reports. And so often, if you're going to have an external assessor, we choose someone who's really senior, really highly regarded in their field, because they'd be able to see, man, this one examiner doesn't know what they're talking about or whatever. So they would get 3 anonymous reports plus your thesis. There are, as I said, these others that you have an oral exam. I don't know about that happening. I think that would be in a case where there's doubts about whether you actually own the knowledge. You might have used AI, we don't care about that. But do you own the knowledge that's in your thesis in the sense that you can talk to it, you can make sense of it, and so on? And then it's a revision. And then the not award. That would only be in the case of some kind of fraudulence. And even then you have an appeal. Those reports, once it's signed off by the COA, we agree on what should happen. It then goes, because this is doctorate with the COA, it then goes to the Vice Chancellor. The Vice Chancellor then signs off on it. And that, if it's a busy time of year, which is often the case, it might, even after the Committee of Assessors have had to meet, so that adds another week. And they've had to read your reports, and they've had to come to an agreement, and they've had to fill in the form, and then the forms have to be brought together, and then a final thing gets sent to the Vice Chancellor, and then it can sit in the Vice Chancellor's desk for a week. He's usually very, very good, but obviously end of year, he's signing off on a million different things. So all of this can add time. And then once the Vice Chancellor has signed, your supervisor gets an email saying, this is the thing, the student has passed with minor corrections to the satisfaction of the supervisor, or the student has passed with minor corrections to the satisfaction of head of department, or a resubmission is needed. The supervisor gets that email explaining that, and then 24 hours, automatically you get the exact same email. The reason for that is that we believe that your supervisor should have your best interests at heart. They know your work, they know you. So they get that email, and they've literally got 24 hours to make a phone call to you, to help you mediate it, especially in the case of a resubmission, to say, listen, I know this is not what we wanted, but I've got your back. We're going to work on this. We're going to get it done. It happens sometimes. This is not a failure. And I think it's better to have that in a conversation with your supervisor instead of getting that cold email. But your supervisor only has 24 hours before you get sent the email anyway. On the other hand, if, as most of the time it is, it's good news to say congratulations. It's also quite nice as a supervisor to get to be the one to phone you and give you that good news. So those are the reasons why that happens. I'm going to stop sharing and quickly go to your questions and comments to check if I've tackled these things. It takes time. The examination has 6 weeks, but you're talking about a week beforehand, you're talking about a week or two afterwards, 6, 7, 8, 9. You're looking at between 9 weeks, um, somewhere around there. Best case scenario, you're probably looking at 9 weeks. Worst case scenario might be longer. Um, are the examiners known to students? No, they are not. Do you have to defend your thesis? No, you don't do an oral defense, although I'm very much in favor of those because I've been part of Viva exams at various universities and I just see the benefits that they have. The question about ORC ID. If you do not have an ORC ID, the lab, well, you can go online, just search, how do I get an ORC ID? It's a number. It's a number that's associated with you and all your future work, master's, doctorate, publications. And it's very useful because especially a lot of women get married, change their names. So you've got one article or one master's associated with one surname and then a PhD associated with another name, or you could be Sue McKenna, S. McKenna, S.M. McKenna. All those people are me. And I want to make sure all those publications are associated with me. And an ORC ID is an ID number for research. And that ID number stays with you wherever you go, whatever country you're in, whatever field you're in. So once you get an ORC ID, that's your ORC ID. And the library can help you if you can't figure out how to do it online. But you get one ORC ID and ORC ID automatically trawls the internet and it'll pick up publications of yours. It might ask you, hey, is this you? But you can also edit your own ORC ID page. So if you've had a publication that for some reason Google Scholar or ORC ID doesn't pick up, you can add it. So make sure you do get that ORC ID. Rhodes University have a rule. It's not always very well implemented, but they have a rule that on your front page of your master's thesis or your front page of your doctorate, where you have your name and your title and your supervisor's name, it says that you must have your ORC ID there as well. Although many people don't do that, but it does tell, we do have that rule that it should be there. And that's for good reason, because it allows you to very clearly claim your work regardless of changing universities, changing fields, even changing surnames. Your abstract, if you come back to this higher degrees guide, it tells you everything around the formatting, the abstract, and so on. And again, the rules, it tells you the rules, doesn't mean everyone sticks with them, but it also very clearly says that you can have an abstract in English. Presumably that's your language of writing your thesis, it most commonly is, and have a translation of your abstract into whatever your home language is. And a number of students have done that. And I think it just adds something quite powerful to your work. And so we have at Rhodes University got abstracts in about 15 or 16 different languages now. So do consider doing that. How long? It's very, how long should a thesis be? Well, we only have a maximum. It's specified in the higher degrees guide that your PhD may be a maximum of 100,000 words. Even that, I guess there may be exceptions of why you want to break that rule and you might need to give an explanation. But I can also tell you that the typical PhD thesis is 70,000 words. Of course, it varies by discipline. Some disciplines have got a lot of graphics, a lot of tables, a lot of graphs. Others have got drawings, bits of poetry, or just good old-fashioned straight text. So it's not an absolute rule, but it's a rule of thumb that you're probably looking at about 75,000 words for a thesis. Don't panic if it's less, don't panic if it's more. Your thesis must be as long as it needs to be able to make the claims to knowledge. If it helps you, Albert Einstein's PhD was 27 pages. So whenever I have students going, oh, I think my thesis is too short, I'm going, does it fulfill the requirements of making a contribution to knowledge? If it does, remember Einstein, he managed to do it in 27 pages. But we do have a maximum of 100,000 words for the PhD. We don't have that for the master's, but I would suggest that the average master's is probably about 40, 50,000 words. And your examiner doesn't want to read 100,000 word masters. I reckon 70,000 is more than enough for a master's. But these are all rules of thumb, and it really depends what you're doing with your thesis. Um, Let me look at some more questions. Oh, good. Tanisha, is there a rubric that the examiners follow? Um, yeah, that's actually a good question. There is a form um, that the examiners get when they get asked to do the examining. They will be sent access to Ross to download your thesis, and I don't have a blank one. I'm wondering if I can let me put up a student's let me put up a student's examiner's report that I think is really a strong student, so I wouldn't be putting up anything negative. Um, examiner reports. Let me see. Oh, this doesn't have the cover sheets. So one of the things that our what at Rhodes University is that the examiners are told very clearly, please don't focus on superficial issues. Give us the overarching give us a detailed report that really engages with your understandings. Don't just focus on superficial things. Quickly trying to find oh, darn it. Trying to find an example of a report that doesn't have too much student confidential detail in it. But basically, the examiners just get a form that says it asks them a few questions like, has this met the requirements? Has this met the requirements of a master's or thesis? Sorry, I'm busy talking to you while I'm trying to find an example. Um, has it met the literature? Is it using up-to-date literature? It has a few key questions. Is theory used properly? But they're very brief questions, and then they're asked to write a more detailed report. And in that detailed report, that is a narrative explanation of the strengths and weaknesses of your study. And then they have to tick off no corrections, exactly as you saw in the higher degrees guide. No corrections, minor corrections to the supervisor's satisfaction, minor corrections to the head of department satisfaction, resubmission, or should not get the thesis. You won't get that last one. Um, so it's not a rubric, and it certainly doesn't have marks allocated to each thing. It's just a set of things they should look for. Have they used theory properly? Have they used it's the literature? These are the kinds of things they must look for. They write a detailed narrative report, and then they make their selection, the examiners. Um, okay, I think I've answered. Stacey, is there a specific format that your thesis needs to be in? Have a look at that higher degrees guide. It gives you some ideas about what has to go on the front page, that you've got to have a table of contents, how long your abstract should be. But there isn't a specific format and I think that's important because we want students to be able to do what is appropriate to their study. And if it's appropriate to their study to have bits of paintings and poetry, that's cool. And if it's appropriate to their study to have lots of graphs, that's also cool. I think as long as you're consistent. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Um, but and ask if there are any questions. But please, 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 can I ask all of you before you leave in a few minutes to follow the link I've just put onto the chat because that's asking for evaluations. I know this session was a bit boring and just you listening to me rabbiting on, but hopefully it was useful. And we want to hear, and it's anonymous. So follow that link. Tell us what was good. If it was too boring just listening to me talking, that's also cool. We need to know that. And tell us what other workshops you need. So I really urge people to follow that link in the chat bar to give an evaluation of this workshop and tell us what you need from CPGS. But before we go, let me check, are there any questions that I haven't addressed, worries, concerns? Please, if the process is taking months and months and months, and it feels like no one is letting you know what's going on, please do reach out. Reach out to your supervisor, your dean, to me, to this other people in the Centre for Postgraduate Studies. Don't sit with that anxiety that often comes from silence. It's something I feel strongly about. I really think we should do a better job of keeping people informed as the process goes on, especially if it's in a case that it drags on. But I think sometimes students are left a little bit in the dark, and I don't want you to be in the dark. So if you're not getting answers, please do consider maybe coming and chatting to me. Tanisha, how long do students get to revise after feedback from an examiner? It's a great question. For a revise and resubmit, you have to re-register. So let's say you submit in November and January comes, you don't re-register because you're under examination. While you're under examination, you do not need to be registered. So January comes, February comes, March, you get told, yay, you're through, you're going to graduate in April. Fantastic. But let's say, unfortunately, March comes along and they say, oh, you've got 3 reports, 2 of them say they want resubmissions. You've got a bit more work to do. You will then register again and have to pay fees again because you will need to be a registered student while you continue that work before it goes back to the examiners. But you can get a pro rata examiner registration. So typically you'll have 6 months. You normally get 6 months to do the revisions. And for it to resubmit, and so you will need to re-register. If your corrections are minor changes, you don't register. You normally get given as long as it takes. But typically, often it's done in a great hurry because you get told in February, March, you get told the end of February, yes, minor corrections, but all the final version of the thesis has to be uploaded onto Ross by the 15th of March if you want to graduate in April. So suddenly you've got only 2 weeks to make all these corrections, but luckily it's only your supervisor who's to sign off on them. You'll talk to your supervisor about how they want you to do that. Because for my own students, I always say you must put on track changes so that when you send it to me, I don't have to reread the whole thesis. I go through the track changes and check. I also make my students complete a table, and in the left-hand column, they cut and paste from the examiner's reports for each change the examiner's calling for, and on the right-hand side, they can just write done, page 17 or whatever, or I decided not to make this change for this and this reason, so that you can speak back. If it's a resubmission, you probably don't want to say you're wrong to the examiner because they're going to get it again. So even there, you can talk back to what they're calling for, but your supervisor will need to help you do that in a way that it won't upset the examiner, explain why you're not taking their advice. But if it's corrections to your supervisor's satisfaction or the HOD's satisfaction, have a meeting with them, go through the report, say, I don't think I need to do this. I think this is not good advice. If your supervisor agrees, in that table that I ask my students to do, not all students have to do this, where they put the examiner's comment on the right-hand side, they'll say, I chose not to move this section because although the examiner said it should be in the methods, I think it works better at the beginning of the findings. That's it. So for me, when my students have to make changes to the supervisor satisfaction, I get them to do a track change version and this table. But that will depend on how your supervisor asks for it. But so often those changes have to get done in a great hurry because you're trying to get the deadline for graduation. But if it's between graduation ceremonies, if you take a few more weeks, that's fine. Just watch those deadlines. It's usually around the 15th of March for the April graduation, and it's usually around the 15th of September for the October graduation. But those deadlines change every year. The registrar's division will tell you this is the absolute deadline for the final approved version of your thesis. It's what they call the library version of your thesis, because that's the version that'll go onto the library's repository. 70,000 words is how many pages? Well, Google will tell us that. I guess it depends what your font size is. I should have said that. When you submit your thesis for examination, I always tell my students make it double spacing or 1.5 spacing. As an examiner, I want to be able to read it easily without hurting my eyes. And if I print it out, as some examiners like to do, I want to be able to scribble on the page. So I don't want font all closely together. Okay, according to Google, 70,000 words is 140 single spaced. You're not going to use single spaced, 280 double spaced, or I suppose somewhere in between, 300, 1.5 spacing, somewhere around there. These are not rules, though. These are rules of thumb. And you need to make yours as long as works for your study. The other last questions. Well, then I just have to remind you again to please be a darling, all of you, and to complete the evaluation and to say thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry that it was just you sitting listening to me rabbiting on, but I hope it was useful nonetheless. And do have a look for that higher degrees. The higher degrees guide we're using at the moment is Higher Degrees Guide, published in 2024, and it really does have a lot of information. Thanks, guys. Keep well and good luck. I know it's a horrible, scary process, the examination process, but it too shall pass. Bye, everyone.